Well, on that note, we will go ahead and get started with our planning and zoning regular meeting, for 5:30 on what day is it, May 14th. So we'll call the meeting to order. Number 2 on our agenda is citizen comments. So this is an opportunity for citizens to address the commission with comments and or questions about planning and zoning commission related matters. They're not related to a public hearing. However, we don't have any public hearings on our agenda tonight. So, is there anybody in the audience who has any public comment? No, I don't see any. Anything emailed or called in, Dawn? No? Well, that takes care of item number 2. All right, commission number 3, on our active agenda is approval of the April 9, 2025 meeting minutes. Did everybody get a chance to look over those? I did. I thought they looked good.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the April 9th meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you, Kathy. Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None?
I abstain.
Oh, okay. Motion carries with 1 abstention. All right, item B, consideration of changes to ZA-02-25, tiny houses. This is an action item.
We have to manually do it? Okay. There we go. Okay. So in front of you guys tonight, so Joel had brought this, in front of you a couple weeks ago to do the initiation of it. Since then, planning staff have met with Public Works a couple of times to go over the proposed changes, and some suggestions were made to simplify what we were putting into code regarding tiny homes, and we thought those suggestions were valid. And so in front of you is a new draft. It's called the 42925 draft up in the top corner. The 418 draft was the original one that you had seen, and it had additional information regarding building height, yard sizes, lot dimensions, detached and attached garages, lots of extra pieces in it. And we've removed all of those. And so instead, the idea is to treat tiny homes, tiny houses specifically, they are defined in International Building Code, to just add them to the definitions section, which is 37-3, to add the tiny home as defined and built to the standards of International Residential Code as adopted in our chapter 10. So there are specific code requirements when it comes to building a tiny home. And then in addition to that, changing part of the definition under recreational vehicle. Some tiny homes are built to a recreational vehicle standard and are on like a chassis and have wheels underneath them. And those are different than what is required by chapter 10, where they're considered like a single family dwelling. Standards are kind of similar to those required for manufactured homes and the installation of a manufactured home, and that is set forth by Idaho code. So we wanted to make sure that we did have that differentiation in the code, that people understand that you can't utilize a tiny home or like a park model that was built just in a factory and is not to a HUD code standard. And is still on wheels and et cetera, as a tiny home on a regular single family dwelling lot. So those are the highlights. Everything else goes away. So we will not be doing all of the lot size, all of the other pieces. It would be treated as a single family dwelling. Just built to that standard of 400 square feet or less, because that's how it's defined in International Residential Code. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't here at the meeting where we were talking about this, would they be allowed? Like if you had a residential home already, put a tiny home on the same lot?
You could, because it would fall under the accessory dwelling unit code, which allows for up to 600 square feet. So it wouldn't even have to like meet the tiny home, which is 400 or less. It would just have to follow those ADU rules that are already set forth in code. But yes, you could use a tiny home that met the HUD standard as an ADU, 100%. There are even really small, single wide manufactured homes that we have allowed because they meet all the standards of an accessory dwelling unit. Any other questions? Are we good with these changes? Do I get a nod? Fantastic. We'll get scheduled for the public hearing.
All right, well, then we will move on to item C of our active agenda, consideration of initiation of zoning code amendment ZA 03 25 preschool. You're up again, Katie.
And I just realized, I'm sorry, I did not introduce myself like I'm supposed to for the record. Katie Hollingshead, Assistant Planner. There we go. Okay, so, a couple months ago, we had a conditional use permit application come through for a preschool facility. In the process of doing that staff report and the process to bring it in front of this board, staff could not really figure out why, schools were allowed in most residential zones, only with the caveat that they do a mailing if you're gonna put a brand new one in. And there's a couple of conditions listed in code currently regarding like size and appropriateness and that kind of stuff. Why those same things weren't applicable to a preschool, because normally a preschool is gonna be much smaller than a school. Correct? Correct. So we are bringing in front of you a code amendment to the zoning code to add some definitions regarding like what a preschool facility is, what a school is, because that's not currently defined in our code, and then adding it as an allowed use in the same residential zones that schools are currently allowed, and removing it from that CUP use in those same zones. We would also add, like I said, there are special conditions that are applicable to schools. And so we would add those same special conditions to preschools. And then one additional change, just because we're in there and we might as well clean it up. A couple years ago, you may recall that we adjusted the notification distance from 300 feet to 330 feet for public hearing notices. And so we would also change that within those special conditions, because right now it reads that you would get a mailing to people within 300 feet, which would allow them to provide input prior to having to go to a public hearing. And so it only makes sense for those two numbers to match. Because if you were to get it at 300 and you wanted to object to it and push it to that public hearing process, and then people an additional 30 feet around you are then noticed when you go through that public hearing process, it makes more sense to have those numbers be the same and for it to be consistent throughout the code. So those are the highlights of what we have recommended be amended in the code. And so this would be initiation, and then it would come back in front of you for a public hearing. Any questions?
Thank you. Katie, so forgive me if I'm not seeing it right. So we're just taking it out of conditional use permit required in an R1 zone, correct?
In all residential zones where it's currently a conditional use and not a use by right. So if a school is a use by right in a residential zone and a preschool is a conditional use in a residential zone, we are removing it from conditional and we're putting it next to schools.
Right.
So wherever a school would be allowed, a preschool would also be allowed by right.
So, but I mean, to me, the reason that we were doing conditional use permits for preschools and not schools is schools are run by the school district and the state government.
Preschools are also run by the school district and the state government, but if they are standalone, currently they have to be done separately.
Okay, maybe
I don't think you were here for the CUP, which was ran by a state government agency.
okay, maybe not. But yeah, so I was thinking, maybe I'm just thinking of preschools, people that have like daycare preschool kind of stuff. private like that. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so if it was a daycare that offered, so usually a daycare, if it's a daycare center, and so this is why we don't see preschools very often. A lot of times you'll have a daycare come in and they'll want to do a center, and they'll either do a center in a zone where a center is allowed, and they'll do preschool as an accessory use to that center.
Okay.
Or they'll want to do a center in a zone where a conditional use permit is required. They will go through that process for their daycare center, and then they may also provide preschool as an accessory use to that daycare center. Very infrequently do we see someone operating just a preschool.
Gotcha. Okay, then.
Because most of the time they come in and they're an accessory use to a primary use. So they're accessory to a church. They ran with a church, right?
So
They're not
go
the
through
main
that.
use, they're accessory, right? They're accessory to a daycare center. They're accessory to a school. There's one being ran, I think it's out of Webster right now. So a lot of times they're accessory, and so they don't necessarily need to come through. But we do have instances where it's just a preschool, maybe, and like for the CUP, it was a preschool that was going to share facility with Boys and Girls Club, which was also done by a CUP.
Oh, yeah. I was here for that.
Okay, so, but that was run by Head Start, so that's a
Right.
government agency. But because it was a standalone and it was not an accessory use to a primary that's already allowed in the zone, that CUP was required.
Okay.
So the idea is, it won't be frequent that you would see new preschools go in. But we feel like it makes sense to treat them like schools. And so you would still have that neighborhood notification where people would be able to comment and object if they wanted to object, and they would come to CUP. This just gives it a little bit more flexibility rather than making everybody go through that CUP process, for the preschool. Preschools are normally, less, dense of a use
Sure.
than even a school is, because normally you have one class of 20 or two classes of 20, rather than, 300 kids or whatever it is for a standard, elementary school.
Thank you for clearing that.
Any other questions, commission? Well, if there are no more questions, comments, then I will take a motion to initiate the zoning code amendment for ZA-03-25.
So moved.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye to initiate the amendment.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? All right, so we will see that on our next meeting later this month. Moving on to item D is preliminary plat for Ridgeline subdivision and the consideration of the associated reason statement of relevant criteria and standards. Mark, take it away.
Commissioners, good evening. Mark Wiggins, City Surveyor. I'll be presenting the staff report for the Ridgeline subdivision preliminary plat. Start with our GIS overview. So the preliminary plat of the Ridgeline subdivision proposes to plat approximately 0.94 acres of land into 3 new development lots. See there right here. The property is located north of Grell Avenue between 16th and 17th Streets. 16th over here, 17th there, Grell at the bottom. The proposed subdivision is composed of 1 standard lot that has frontage on improved Grell Avenue and complies with the minimum required lot frontage for the zone, and 2 additional flag lots configured in conformance with section 37-124 of City Code for flag lot development. An existing residence with a detached garage currently occupies the property, and those structures are located on the proposed lot 1. And so you can kind of see that in here. This would be the residence, and this would be the detached garage. The rest of these structures back here are all kind of small. I think in most cases, they were actually greenhouses, because they kind of use this as a farm produce type lot for a while. So anyway, most of those are gone already, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit later too. So next we have a couple photos of the site. Our first photo is taken from the south side of Grell Avenue near the southeast corner of the subdivision. We're looking generally north, and we can see the existing single-family dwelling and detached garage that will occupy lot 1. So there's the house, there's the garage. This perspective essentially looks north along the proposed flagpole driveway that the developer is proposing to construct along the east side of the property, so that'll go right down this opening. And you can see from this photo that the property slopes gently to the north away from Grell Avenue. Is just going on to the other side, and this is, I've just moved basically west along Grell Avenue to the westerly side of the proposed subdivision, and now looking generally north along the westerly property line. And once again, here's our existing house that will remain and our detached garage. We'll move over to the actual preliminary plat document. On the preliminary plat, we can see the proposed configuration of the 3 lots. On the east side is the proposed driveway for the 2 flag lots. So that's this kind of shaded in area is the driveway. And it is a good time to point out that the proposed driveway that they are intending to use a shared access driveway as explained in section 37-124D2 of city code. And in this case, that allows the developer to access the 2 flag lots with 2 adjacent 15-foot flagpoles with 1 shared driving surface that must be paved prior to recording of the plat. You'll kind of notice there's a line right down the center and it comes over here. Theoretically, all this stuff on this 15 feet actually belongs to the rear lot. The 15 feet on the west side actually belongs to this front lot. That is a deviation from the standard flag lot plan where they are required to have 20 feet in kind of exchange for not having that additional 20 feet for both. Then they do this shared access driveway where we have this paved driveway between that they get to both use. And that then here on this left side, we actually have a cross section of what that looks like, showing the rock and the asphalt that are needed to be used. So in addition, the individual lots will need to share the driveway as a result of non-exclusive access easements established along the driveway by the final plat. And we'll see those, in the final plat, those will be specifically called out. And in addition, we will require the developer to establish provisions for mutual maintenance agreements for the purchasers of the 2 lots. So then as time goes on, the 2, if potholes, whatever occur, then they will both be responsible for that. Due to the depth of the lots, a fire apparatus access turnaround conforming to the requirements established in Lewiston Fire Department Standard Operating Procedure 906 will also be required to be constructed at the north end of the shared access driveway. And that's basically this. This is what we would consider a hammerhead version of that turnaround. I also wanted to point out that there are notes on the preliminary plat indicating that the developer intends to remove structures, and you can kind of see those down here where they're talking about these structures. If you'll recall photo number 1 that I showed you, and I can go back to that, you can see here in photo number 1 that technically those structures have already been removed. So they're already working on getting that area opened up to create that shared access driveway. The developer will also need to fulfill frontage improvement requirements by constructing curb, gutter, sidewalk, and asphalt patchback along the Grell Avenue frontage. So that you can kind of see down here where this kind of shaded area here is the patchback they'll require, the sidewalk. There will probably be a infiltration swale for stormwater in there as well, and then curb between the 2. And there is also, this shows then there's a section on here that shows that Grell Avenue street as well, what it would look like in sectional view there, if you'd like to look at that. LOID and COSD currently have existing service mains in Grell Avenue and provide water and sewer service respectively for the proposed development. Avista Utilities, CenturyLink Lumen, and Sparklight have also confirmed their intent to provide utility services. The subject property is in the R1 zone and the standard lot meets the applicable standards for the R1 zone. And in addition, the flag lots meet the applicable standards from Lewiston City Code Section 27-124 for flag lot development. The preliminary plat is presented at a scale of 20 feet to the inch when printed at full scale, which differs from the 100 feet to the inch standard specified in Section 3220A of Subdivision Code. But because the 20 feet to 1 inch scale provides for better clarity of lines, bearings, and dimensions as specified in Title 50, Section 1304.1 of Idaho Code, city staff recommends that the 20 feet to 1 inch scale be accepted as exceeding the code requirement of the specified 100 feet to the inch scale. With the exception of the noted difference in scale, the preliminary plat complies with the applicable requirements of the City of Lewiston Subdivision Ordinance, City Code Chapter 32. City staff recommends that the Lewiston Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the Lewiston City Council approval of the Ridgeline Subdivision Preliminary Plat as presented. And I have once again included a draft reason statement with your information packet, which incorporates information contained in the staff report for your consideration or use at your discretion. And this concludes the staff report. I'm available for any questions.
Shut, drive me. Okay, well. If there's no anything else, then I can take a motion to approve the preliminary plat as presented.
So do we need to go through the reason statement?
Do we need to go through the reason statement? Can't recall if we do that for preliminary plats or not.
You can if you wish. There is a draft reason statement in front of you, so if there's anything you'd wish to change about that, you're welcome to do so.
Did everybody get a chance to look at the draft?
I don't have any
It looked really good.
Yeah.
addition or correction.
We're okay as presented? Alright, well, with that, I will take a motion to take the draft reason statement on the preliminary plat. Been moved, is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None, motion carries. And that recommendation of approval will move forward to city council. All right, so that takes us out of our active agenda to item number 4, which is staff commission communications. And I notice I should have turned the page over, which would have told me what to do in the first place, so bear with me. So item number 4 is everybody planning to be here for the meeting on the 28th?
I will be absent.
You'll be absent?
There's a possibility that I will not make it back in time.
Okay,
As far as I know.
and as far as I know, I'll be here. Cynthia?
Should, I'm off that week, but just working on the cabinet law, so I can make it done.
And then, Katie, do you recall if Maureen said she'd be back for that meeting?
I don't think so. I think she was gonna be gone for this one and for that one because she's announcing at NAIA.
So we'll have tentatively 4, maybe 5, so 4 might be difficult for that meeting, but we'll play it by ear on that one, okay?
So definitely, if anyone else is unable, let us know as soon as possible, because we will have to reschedule public hearings.
And redo public
And
Notices.
redo notices.
Yeah.
My favorite part.
And the CPA 01.
We're
that's
not gonna do that yet.
Okay, so that will not be on
That will
our,
not be on that.
okay. I was gonna say, I don't recall seeing anything about it, which doesn't necessarily mean anything.
No, it's in response to some legislature that
Oh,
has
okay.
gone through and will be effective after July 1. And so we're still working through
What that looks
yep,
like.
what that looks like and when you guys will see it. You will see it eventually, but
Okay, perfect. Okay, then we'll have a couple public hearings on the agenda for the 28th. All right, well, if there's nothing else, commission, I will take a motion to adjourn. Moved,
Second,
seconded,
yeah.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all right, we are adjourned. Thank you, commission. No? You'll make my job easy.